"Your schedule isn't important," my husband said over the phone. "You can cancel anything for me. I'm the priority." I remember staring at the wall while he spoke, my fingers tightening around my phone, my chest going strangely hollow. 4 days earlier, I had turned 30, 5 years into marriage, a decade into loving the same man. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. My time, my commitments, my sense of purpose had quietly been reduced to an inconvenience. I didn't yell, I didn't fight back, I just said, "If you say so." What he didn't know, what he couldn't have imagined, was that one of the commitments he was demanding I cancel was directly tied to the very thing he'd been bragging about for weeks. To his friends, to his coworkers, online, in public, loudly, proudly, as if it were his own. And 4 days later, in a crowded community hall, filled with applause, smiles, and expectation, the truth surfaced. I watched my husband's face collapse in real time. The confidence drained first, then the smile, then the color. As the room turned toward me, clapping, celebrating, acknowledging something I had built quietly, patiently, without recognition at home, he realized exactly what his words had cost him. This wasn't about a missed dinner, or a scheduling conflict, or even respect in the small, everyday sense. This was about how easily someone can love you while still believing their life matters more than yours. For years, I told myself this was just stress, that marriage meant compromise, that love meant bending, adjusting, shrinking when necessary. I canceled meetings, rearranged plans, stepped back from things that made me feel alive because I thought that's what partnership required. But that weekend, standing in front of a room full of strangers who saw my value more clearly than the man who shared my bed, I understood something I couldn't unsee. Sometimes people don't realize what you bring to the table until you're the one being applauded. And sometimes, by the time they do, the damage is already done. I was 25 when I met him. We were both in graduate school, both exhausted in the same quiet way, both pretending we weren't terrified of becoming adults. He sat 2 rows ahead of me in a seminar that met twice a week, always early, always organized, always confident in a way that felt grounding. I remember thinking he seemed like someone who knew exactly where he was going. I didn't. We started talking after a group project forced us together. Coffee turned into late nights at the library. Late nights turned into dinners that stretched past midnight. He was charming, attentive, the kind of man who listened closely and made you feel like your thoughts mattered. When he asked about my goals, he didn't interrupt. When I talked about wanting my work to mean something, he nodded like he understood. By the time we graduated, being together felt inevitable. We married young, but not recklessly. At least that's how I justified it. We'd already survived finals, deadlines, financial stress, and uncertainty. We knew each other's bad habits, his need for control, my tendency to overextend myself. We believed love and effort would smooth out the rest. For the most part, it did. The early years of our marriage were good, quietly good. We both worked. We split responsibilities without keeping score. He was ambitious, driven by how things looked from the outside. I was more internal, drawn to work that felt purposeful rather than impressive. Our differences felt complementary then, balanced. We had separate interests, but we came together when it mattered. Family events, career milestones, celebrations, losses. When something important happened, we showed up for each other. Or at least I thought we did. The shift didn't happen all at once. It never does. It crept in slowly, disguised as practicality, as efficiency, as him being realistic. He started treating my time like it was flexible by default, adjustable. If he needed something, I was expected to rearrange. If I had plans, they were questioned, downplayed, dismissed. "It's not that important," he'd say casually. "You can reschedule. I need you here." At first, I told myself it was temporary. He had more responsibility at work. His family was going through things. He seemed overwhelmed. I thought support meant stepping back, so I did. I canceled dinners with friends. I moved meetings. I skipped commitments that excited me because I didn't want to seem unsupportive. I didn't want to be the wife who put herself first. That's what you do in a marriage, right? Except it didn't stop. Every plan I made became conditional. Every commitment had to pass through his approval, even when he didn't frame it that way. If I hesitated, he'd sigh. If I pushed back, he'd make it about loyalty, about priorities. And slowly, subtly, I started questioning my own. Around 3 months before everything came to a head, I joined a community organization focused on local education initiatives, mentorship programs, after-school resources for kids who didn't have much support. It was something I'd cared about for years, something that made me feel useful beyond my job title. When I told him I'd signed on, he barely looked up from his phone. "Sounds nice," he said. I explained the schedule: 2 evenings a week, occasional weekend meetings. I asked if he was okay with it, not because I needed permission, but because I wanted transparency. "Yeah," he said. "Fine, whatever you want to do." So I committed. I started attending meetings, coordinating with volunteers, helping shape the structure of a new after-school program. It was fulfilling in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt present, needed, energized. At home, though, it barely existed. He never asked about it, never followed up. If I mentioned something, he'd nod vaguely and change the subject. It was clear he didn't care, not because it didn't matter, but because it wasn't his. I didn't push. I didn't insist. I told myself it was okay to have separate worlds. I didn't realize how much space that silence was creating, because when he eventually stepped into that same world, everything changed. And not in the way I expected. About 6 weeks after I joined the organization, my husband suddenly became interested in it, not because of the work, not because of the kids, not because of the mission. Because one of his coworkers had joined and made it sound impressive. I remember the night he brought it up. We were at dinner, halfway through a conversation about his job, when he casually said, "Oh, by the way, I'm thinking of getting involved with that community organization you mentioned." I looked up, surprised. "Really?" "Yeah," he said, scrolling through his phone. "Apparently it's kind of a big deal. A lot of professionals are involved. Good visibility." Visibility. That word stuck with me. He signed up for the fundraising side almost immediately, and suddenly the organization existed again, but only through his lens. He started talking about it at dinner parties, leaning back in his chair, voice confident. "I'm organizing a whole campaign," he'd say. "It's a lot of responsibility, but someone has to step up." People nodded, complimented him, asked questions. I sat there, smiling politely, listening as he spoke about the organization like he'd discovered it himself. I didn't correct him. I didn't interrupt. I told myself it didn't matter who got credit as long as the work got done. And besides, I didn't want to embarrass him. What he didn't know, what he hadn't bothered to ask, was that the after-school program I'd been coordinating was the organization's flagship initiative, the one receiving the most attention, the one attracting potential grants, the one local officials were watching closely. I was working quietly behind the scenes, building something real, while he performed involvement on the surface. The imbalance at home grew sharper. Every time I mentioned a meeting, his tone shifted. "Another one?" When I talked about deadlines, he'd sigh. "Can't that wait?" If I tried to explain why something mattered, he'd nod without listening. But when his fundraising calls ran late, when his events conflicted with plans, there was no debate. I adjusted automatically, out of habit, out of conditioning. I started noticing how often I was the one bending. Still, I didn't confront him. I didn't want to create conflict over something I thought I could handle. I convinced myself this was just another phase, that once the excitement wore off, things would settle. Then came the call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was reviewing notes for a planning meeting scheduled for Thursday evening, the final session before we launched the program. I'd mentioned it to him the week before, reminded him again on Monday. My phone rang. "I need you to come to dinner with me Thursday night," he said without preamble. "I can't," I replied. "I have that meeting I told you about." There was a pause. "What meeting?" The way he said it, flat, dismissive, made my stomach tighten. "The volunteer planning session," I said carefully. "The one I've been talking about." "Oh," he said. "Can't you reschedule?" "No, it's the final meeting before launch." "Launch what?" I closed my eyes for a second. "The after-school program, the one I've been working on for months." "Right," he said slowly. "Well, this dinner is important. It's with my coworkers and their spouses. I need you there." I tried to keep my voice steady. "I can't cancel this." "Why not?" he asked. "It's just a volunteer thing." The word just hit harder than I expected. "It's not just a volunteer thing," I said. "It's a major project." He laughed, sharp and dismissive. "My dinner is important for my career, which, let's be honest, is more important than your little hobby project." Something inside me went quiet. That was the moment, the exact second when I realized this wasn't about schedules anymore. It was about value. And he had already decided whose mattered more. I didn't respond right away, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I suddenly became aware of my own breathing. Shallow, tight, like my body was bracing for something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. Are you seriously going to prioritize some volunteer meeting over supporting me? He continued, his voice firm now, irritated. I need you there. It's not about prioritizing, I said quietly. Yes, it is, he snapped. Your schedule isn't important. You can cancel anything for me. I'm the priority. The words settled between us, heavy and final, not shouted, not dramatic, just stated like a fact he assumed I already understood. I took a breath. If you say so. So you'll come to dinner? He asked, already moving on. I didn't say that, I replied. I said if you say so, not that I agree. There was silence on the line, long enough that I thought the call might have dropped. Then, you're unbelievable, he said. Fine, go to your meeting. But don't expect me to keep accommodating your schedule if you won't do the same for me. And then he hung up. I stared at my phone, my reflection faintly visible on the dark screen. My little hobby project. That's what he'd called it. The thing I'd poured months of energy into. The thing that made me feel like I was contributing to something bigger than myself. His dinner was networking. Mine was about launching a program that would serve dozens, eventually hundreds of kids. Both were valid. But the way he dismissed mine, like it was insignificant compared to his ambitions, cut deeper than I expected. Thursday came anyway. I went to the meeting. We finalized everything. Timelines, staffing, curriculum rollout. The room buzzed with focus and purpose. When we wrapped up, there was this collective sense of relief and excitement. The program was officially set to launch the following month. Before we left, the director announced there would be a large community meeting that Saturday. A public launch, introductions, recognition. It would be the first time the project was formally presented to the community. I drove home feeling proud, fulfilled, nervous in a good way. When I walked through the door, my husband barely looked at me. Hope your meeting was worth it, he said flatly, then went to bed. Friday morning, he didn't speak to me at all. No goodbye, no acknowledgement. I told myself he'd cool off. That evening, I mentioned the community meeting. They're announcing the program tomorrow, I said. You should come if you're free. What kind of announcement? He asked, glancing up from his laptop. Introducing the after-school program, the team, the goals. Oh, he said, I might stop by. One of my coworkers mentioned it. You should, I said. It's a big deal. He shrugged. We'll see. Saturday morning, he was suddenly very interested. What time is the meeting? He asked while getting dressed. 10, I replied. You coming? Yeah, he said casually. My coworker's going. And since I'm part of the fundraising team now, I should probably know what we're raising money for. I didn't respond. I just grabbed my keys. The community center was already packed when we arrived. Families, volunteers, local officials. The energy in the room was electric. He immediately found his coworker and started talking animatedly. I checked in with the organizers, making sure everything was set. At 10:15, the director stepped up to the microphone. She spoke about the organization's mission, thanked the volunteers. Then she began talking about the after-school program. This initiative has been in development for over 6 months, she said, and it wouldn't be possible without the incredible dedication of our coordination team. Applause filled the room. My husband clapped too, smiling, leaning toward his coworker like they were part of something important. And now, the director continued, I want to introduce the person who's been leading this effort from the beginning, the one who conceptualized the program, built the curriculum, coordinated with schools, recruited mentors, and made this whole thing possible. I felt my heart start to pound. Please join me in recognizing our program coordinator. She looked directly at me. Come on up. As I stood and walked toward the front, the room erupted in applause. I glanced at my husband. His face drained of color. The smile vanished. He stood frozen, hands half-clapped, eyes locked on me like he was seeing me for the first time. And in that moment, under bright lights, surrounded by strangers who understood my value better than the man I married, I knew there was no going back to how things were before. Standing at the front of that room, microphone warm in my hand, I felt strangely detached from my own body. The applause echoed around me, loud and sustained, but all I could hear was my own heartbeat. I gave a short speech, thanked the volunteers, talked about the kids, outlined the goals. I kept it focused, professional, calm. Inside, everything was shaking. When I finished, people lined up to shake my hand. Parents asked questions. Volunteers thanked me. A local council member complimented the structure of the program. I smiled, nodded, answered, move through the crowd like this was any other Saturday. I didn't look for my husband. I didn't need to. He didn't come over. He stayed near the wall with his coworker, posture stiff, eyes darting away whenever I glanced in his direction. 20 minutes passed before the room finally began to empty. I found him near the exit. "Ready to go?" I asked. He didn't answer, just turned and walked toward the car. The drive home was silent. His arms were crossed tightly, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the window. I kept my hands steady on the steering wheel, my mind racing with everything I wanted to say and nothing I felt ready to voice. When we got home, he finally spoke. "Why didn't you tell me you were leading that project?" I turned to him. "I did, multiple times." "You said you were volunteering," he snapped. "You didn't say you were in charge of the whole thing." "I told you I was coordinating the after-school program," I replied. "What did you think that meant?" He hesitated. "I thought you were just helping out. Not that." "Would it have mattered?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer immediately. Then, yes, it would have. "Why?" He exhaled sharply. "Because I've been telling people about the organization, about my involvement, and now everyone's going to think I didn't even know what my own wife was doing." "So that was it. You're upset because you look uninformed," I said. "I'm upset because you made me look stupid," he shot back. "I didn't make you do anything," I replied. "You chose not to listen." He stared at me. "You should have made it clearer how big of a deal it was." "I tried," I said. "You didn't care." "That's not fair." "It is fair," I said firmly. "Every time I brought it up, you changed the subject or dismissed it. You were too busy being excited about your fundraising role to notice that the thing you were raising money for was something I built." Silence. "And when you told me my schedule wasn't important," I continued, my voice steady despite the tightness in my chest, "the meeting you wanted me to skip was the final planning session for the program everyone just celebrated. So yes, my schedule mattered. You just didn't think it did." He stood abruptly, grabbed his jacket. "I need to get out of here." "Where are you going?" I asked. "I don't know, anywhere but here." The door slammed behind him. I sat on the couch long after his car pulled away. Not angry, not crying, just tired. Tired of shrinking. Tired of being invisible in my own marriage. That night he didn't come home. And for the first time in 5 years, I wondered what staying might cost me. He didn't come home that night. Around 8 in the evening, my phone buzzed with a single text. "Staying at a friend's place. Need space. No apology, no explanation, just distance, packaged neatly as self-care." I didn't reply. Sunday morning, I was sitting at the kitchen table when the front door opened. He walked in slowly, set his keys down, and sat across from me, like we were strangers negotiating something fragile. "We need to talk," he said. "Okay." He rubbed his hands together, avoiding my eyes. "I've been thinking about yesterday, about how I've been treating your time." I waited. "I didn't realize how dismissive I'd been," he continued. "I didn't understand how important that project was." "It was always important," I said. "You just didn't think it was." He nodded. "You're right, I didn't." The words felt hollow, not because they weren't true, but because they came after the applause, after the embarrassment, after the public proof. "And I'm sorry," he added. I leaned back in my chair. "Is that it?" "What do you mean?" "You've been treating my commitments like they're worthless for months," I said. "You finally see evidence that they're not, and now you're apologizing. That doesn't erase the pattern." "I know," he said quickly, "and I want to change that." "Do you?" I asked. "Or are you just sorry because you were embarrassed?" His head snapped up. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" I asked calmly. "If that meeting hadn't been public, would you be apologizing right now?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. That silence answered everything. "I'm trying here," he said finally, frustration creeping in. "I'm admitting I was wrong. What more do you want?" "I want you to actually respect my time," I said, "not just when people are watching." He slumped back in his chair. "You're right. I haven't respected your time, and I don't have an excuse." That was the first honest thing he'd said. But honesty doesn't undo damage. It just exposes it. Over the next few days, the ripple effects started. His coworkers, some of the same people who'd applauded me, began reaching out. Casual messages, compliments, questions. "I had no idea you were leading that program." "He talks about fundraising all the time. Never mentioned you were the coordinator." That must have been awkward. I didn't know how to respond. At home, he grew quieter. He stopped posting about the organization. The enthusiasm drained from his voice when it came up. I could tell he was embarrassed, and part of me understood that, but another part of me couldn't ignore how easily performative involvement had replaced genuine interest. He started asking about my schedule now, about meetings, about sessions with the kids. He listened, really listened. But there was a distance between us that hadn't been there before, like we were both aware of something cracked, unsure how much pressure it could take. One night after dinner, he asked, "Do you think we'll be okay?" I didn't answer right away. "I think we can be," I said finally, "but only if this respect is consistent, not just when it's convenient, not just for a few weeks." "I will," he said quickly. "I promise." I wanted to believe him, but promises don't rebuild trust. Patterns do. And I was no longer willing to ignore the warning signs just to keep the peace. The hardest part wasn't the argument. It wasn't the embarrassment. It wasn't even the realization that I'd been diminished in my own marriage. It was the quiet that followed. For weeks, everything between us felt careful, measured, like we were both afraid that one wrong step would shatter whatever fragile truce we'd reached. He asked about my meetings now. He listened when I spoke. He even came with me to one of the after-school sessions, stood in the back of the room watching the kids work through activities I'd helped design. On the drive home, he said, "I get it now. I really do." I nodded, but something inside me didn't move. Because understanding after the fact doesn't erase months of dismissal. It doesn't rewind the nights I'd canceled plans, the moments I'd swallowed frustration, the times I'd convinced myself I was asking for too much by wanting my life to matter as much as his. I started noticing how tired I felt. Not physically, emotionally, like I'd been holding my breath for too long and didn't know how to exhale anymore. One night, I lay awake next to him, listening to his breathing, and wondered when I'd started feeling so alone in a bed we shared. That thought scared me more than anything else. I replayed moments from the past year in my head. The casual dismissals, the jokes about my flexible schedule, the way he assumed I'd adjust, always. How easily I'd let myself become secondary in my own life. And the worst part? I'd helped create that dynamic by accepting it. I thought about what would have happened if the community meeting hadn't existed. If the director hadn't called my name, if there'd been no applause, no public acknowledgement, would he still think my time mattered? Or would I still be canceling, accommodating, shrinking? That question sat heavy in my chest. A few days later, I overheard him on the phone with his mother. I wasn't trying to listen, but my name came up, and the tension in his voice caught my attention. "She's just distant," he said, "ever since that meeting." There it was, framed like I was the problem now. Like my withdrawal was something happening to him, not a response to months of being sidelined. That night, when he asked if something was wrong, I surprised myself by saying, "I don't know if I trust this yet." "Trust what?" he asked. "This version of you," I said, "the one who suddenly respects my time." He looked hurt. "I'm trying." "I know," I said softly, "but trying doesn't undo what already happened." We sat there in silence, the distance between us more emotional than physical. That was my lowest point. Not because everything was falling apart, but because I realized how close I'd come to losing myself without noticing. And I knew that something had to change, one way or another. The turning point didn't come with shouting or ultimatums. It came quietly, in a moment so small it would have been easy to miss if I wasn't already listening more closely, to him, but mostly to myself. It was a Wednesday afternoon. I was reviewing notes for an upcoming after-school session when he walked into the room, phone in hand. "I have a work event next Thursday," he said. "It overlaps with one of your volunteer nights." My body tensed automatically. Old habits don't disappear overnight. "I was wondering," he continued carefully, "if you could skip your session and come with me." I looked at him, really looked. "I can't," I said. "We have the kids that night." He paused. I waited for the sigh, the argument, the guilt-laced reasoning. Instead, he nodded. "Okay, I understand. I'll go alone." That was it. No pushback, no frustration, no attempt to reframe my commitment as less important. He simply accepted it. Something in my chest loosened. Later that evening, I thought about how small the moment was, and how much it mattered. Because respect isn't proven in grand apologies. It's proven when someone stops expecting you to disappear for their convenience. That night, I sat him down. "I need to be clear about something," I said. "I'm not staying in a marriage where my time is disposable. I love you, but I won't keep shrinking to make things easier." He listened, didn't interrupt. "I don't need you to understand everything I care about," I continued. "I need you to respect it consistently, even when no one's watching." "I know," he said quietly, "and I'm trying to show you that." I nodded. Trying isn't enough forever, but it's a start. That was the moment I reclaimed something I'd been giving away piece by piece, my sense of worth, not by leaving, not by retaliating, but by setting a boundary I was finally willing to enforce. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It unfolded gradually, like a tide pulling back and revealing what had been hidden underneath all along. In the weeks after the community meeting, the social dynamics around my husband shifted, subtly at first, then unmistakably. People who used to praise him for his involvement started asking me questions directly, not out of malice, out of curiosity, respect. They wanted to understand the program, the structure, the impact. They wanted to talk to the person actually doing the work. He noticed. At gatherings, conversations drifted away from him and toward me. Parents thanked me for creating something their kids looked forward to every week. Volunteers asked for my input. Local organizers looped me into planning discussions without hesitation. No one was cruel to him. No one confronted him. But the shift in attention was undeniable, and it shook him. At home, he grew quieter, more observant, less performative. He stopped framing things in terms of how they looked and started asking how they worked. Not just about the organization, about us. His family, too, became more careful. His mother, who had once casually joked about how flexible my schedule was, stopped making comments altogether. One afternoon, she pulled me aside and said, "I didn't realize how much you were carrying." It wasn't an apology, but it was acknowledgement. That mattered. My husband struggled the most with the loss of narrative control. For so long, he'd been comfortable defining what mattered in our lives. His career, his commitments, his priorities. The truth didn't embarrass him because it was public. It unsettled him because it forced him to see himself clearly. And clarity can be brutal. There were nights he sat quietly, scrolling through his phone, not posting, not engaging, just watching, processing, rebuilding his sense of identity without the spotlight he'd grown used to. I didn't gloat. I didn't correct people when they learned the truth on their own. I didn't need to. Reality was doing that work for me. And as for us, I stopped over-explaining, stopped justifying. When I had commitments, I stated them plainly. When I needed time, I took it, calmly, firmly, without apology. He adapted or tried to. One evening, after a long day, he said, "I think I used to measure importance by visibility, and I'm realizing how shallow that was." I didn't rush to comfort him. I let the weight of that realization settle, because growth isn't supposed to feel easy. The power dynamic in our marriage shifted, not because I took something from him, but because I stopped giving something away. My silence changed. My presence changed. My boundaries changed. And the consequences landed exactly where they needed to. It's been 2 months since the community meeting. The after-school program is thriving. 60 kids enrolled, a strong mentor team, stable funding. On the surface, everything looks successful, and in many ways, it is. But the real work has been happening somewhere less visible. At home, my husband has been more mindful. He asks before assuming. He checks instead of demanding. When our schedules conflict, he no longer treats my commitments as optional. And when he slips, which still happens, he corrects himself without defensiveness. Last week, he paused mid-sentence and said, "I almost asked you to cancel, but I caught myself." That mattered more than he knows. Our relationship is still a work in progress. Trust doesn't rebuild on timelines. It rebuilds on consistency, and I'm no longer willing to mistake effort for permanence. Do I still love him? Yes, but I also love myself now in a way I didn't before. I've learned that compromise doesn't mean erasure, that support doesn't require disappearance, and that being a good partner should never come at the cost of your own worth. Some people have asked if I think he's truly changed, or if he's just trying to save face. Honestly, I don't know yet. Time will tell. What I do know is this. I won't stay in a relationship where my life is treated like a footnote. I won't apologize for caring deeply about things that don't serve someone else's image. And I won't shrink again just to keep the peace. If respect fades, I'll see it, and I'll know what I need to do. Because the most important thing I rebuilt through all of this wasn't a program or even a marriage. It was my sense of self. And that's something I refuse to give away again.